Well, hello there. My name is Christopher Scott, and I serve as a small groups pastor of a local church. And in this video, I want to talk to you about doing a covenant of love every year, right? So what is a covenant of love, or doing a group agreement each and every year in your small group? So what are those? Our church, my pastor, Pastor Dave Miller, our senior pastor, gives us a covenant of love that we want our small group to read and sign each year and fill out, right? So it's a basic little one-page document. It has 7 basic covenants that we want our small groups to make, and it's one of those things we want our groups to do to keep them on track, to keep them healthy, keep them productive, and keep them spiritually growing, spiritually mature in their lives, right? So you want to have some type of a covenant or a group agreement that your small group does each and every year. And so our small groups, for example, do this covenant of love, and on it has 7 basic principles, 7 covenants that we want people to agree to in their small group. We want people to be faithful, we want them to be punctual, edifying, open, confidential, gracious, and courteous. Those are 7 things covered on the covenant of love that we want all the small groups to read and cover each year. And you as a small group facilitator should do this in whatever form it might be. Maybe your church has one like we do that you have to cover, that you cover, or maybe you use some curriculum like the Chip Ingram Bible studies produced by Living on the Edge. These have a small group agreement in there that you can cover with your group, right? Which is a great way to keep your group on track, right? So here on The Real Heaven, it talks about the group agreement, and we agree to the following priorities. This is a study that one of our groups did recently called The Real Heaven, and right there it has a group agreement. You can use this in your group instead if your church doesn't have one that they want you to use. These are great to use too. So you want to have some type of a covenant of love or group agreement that you do each and every year. But is a covenant a biblical idea? Sometimes people might say, oh, well, the church is just legalistic. What's the deal with this covenant stuff? Well, covenant is actually a biblical idea. The word for covenant in the Old Testament in Hebrew is berit, and it's used 487 times, right? So God was pretty clear he liked talking about covenants. And then in the New Testament, in Koine Greek, the New Testament Greek term is diatheke, which is used 45 times in the New Testament. So let me explain to you a little bit about how it's used. So covenant is used in the New Testament to describe a promise by God, right? A promise by God. It's specifically in Galatians 3:17, that promise by God is talked about, saying, Paul writes, this is what I'm trying to say. The agreement, the covenant, the diatheke, the agreement God made with Abraham could not be canceled 430 years later when God gave the law to Moses. God would be breaking his promise, right? So a covenant is a promise by God in Galatians 3:17. A covenant also is an agreement between God and Israel. It's an agreement between God and Israel. And in Hebrews 8:29, the author of Hebrews is talking about that covenant where it says this covenant, right? This covenant between God and Israel, this covenant, which is the new covenant that he's making in the New Testament, will not be like the one I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand and led them out of the land of Egypt. They did not remain faithful to my covenant, so I turned my back on them, says the Lord. That's Hebrews 8:29. So a covenant is an agreement between God and Israel in the New Testament, but it's also, there's a new covenant that he's talking about here in the New Testament. Lastly, a covenant is an establishment by the death of Christ on which salvation is secured. So Christ's death makes a covenant that provides salvation, okay? And that's talked about in 1 Corinthians 11:25, where Paul is talking about the Last Supper and communion and how believers should continue to do the Last Supper and have communion together as a way to remember Christ. It says, in the same way, he, which is Jesus, Paul says, in the same way, he, Jesus, took the cup of wine after supper, saying, this cup is the new covenant between God and his people, an agreement confirmed with my blood. Do this in remembrance of me as often as you drink it. 1 Corinthians 11:25. So it's an establishment by the death of Christ on which salvation is. So why would you want to do the covenant of love yearly, right? So we want to do the covenant of love each and every year at our church. I encourage all the groups to do it in the fall. So I give them all the covenant of love forms in August, and usually try to get them all back by October 1st is the goal. So why do the covenant of love every year? Why would you want to do that? Well, first, it helps the church have updated contact information for people in your small group. So people might go to your small group. They might also be going to your church. Maybe they've filled out a card or something at church. But filling out the covenant of love is a great way just to capture everybody's contact information and provide it to your church so your church can communicate with the people about events coming up or things, or provide pastoral care if there's a need such as that, okay? A second reason is that you want to do the covenant of love each year is because it gives the names, phone numbers, and emails of all of your group to the other group members. One of the signs of a healthy small group is when your small group members are talking to each other during the week amongst themselves outside of the group meeting, right? So if you collect all those names and phone numbers, put it in a list, give it to everybody, it's a great way to help everybody stay in touch and to pray for each other and support one another. The third reason you want to do the covenant of love each and every year is it contains great governing principles that will help you have a healthy and strong small group, right? Talks to people about being faithful, punctual, edifying, open, confidential, gracious, and courteous, right? Those are 7 great principles we use to help keep the group healthy, strong, supportive, encouraging, things like that. So it contains great healthy principles to keep your group on track and keep you focused. The fourth reason you want to do the covenant of love each and every year is it's a great tool to refer back to when people are starting to take the group off track, or they're causing a little dissension or causing some issues. That's the first thing you pull out, and you review that covenant of love and you have everybody sign it again. So maybe there's somebody in your group that's not being very gracious and courteous. They're being a little rude, a little curt with people in the group. You pull that covenant of love back out, you read it, you focus specifically on those 2 particular categories, and then you hope that that helps to resolve the situation a little bit. So it's a great tool to start to correct people when they're struggling in those areas, okay? So might feel a little redundant to do a covenant of love form like that each and every year. You're going to do it in the fall, and then before you know it, a year's gone up and you got to do it again. And you might feel like we just did this, but just do it once a year. Cover it, again, read it, and it's something you can do to be proactive to help you have a healthy and strong small group experience, okay? If you found this video helpful, you can subscribe up there and get updates on future videos I put out. If you want other small group facilitator tips, I got a 25 small group facilitator tips playlist right there. If you want to get some brief 5-minute introductions to books of the Bible, I got a series of those videos over there. And then if you want to learn to take a small group through these Chip Ingram Bible study guides I talked about, I got those over there. Thanks for watching, and I hope to catch you again soon in another video.